Hey, folks, welcome to Confronting the Line. This year, as we go on 2026, I've been doing some work. I'm making some changes, or evolutions is more likely, from everything that I've learned over the last couple of years. So, we're going to make some adjustments to Confronting the Line, and I've started a Patreon channel Beyond the Line to continue the conversations, to continue the learning. So, Confronting the Line is a space where we examine the patterns that sit at the boundary between genuine transformation and exploitation. Not to sensationalize, not to accuse, but to increase our understanding around how power actually works. Today, we're using the high profile Epstein case as a reference point, not to determine guilt by association and not to relitigate headlines, but to study the mechanics of credibility, prestige, and influence. When someone embeds themselves in elite networks, surrounds themselves with respected names, and gains access to powerful institutions, what does that do psychologically? For them and for us? Why does proximity to status feel like proof of integrity? And how do intelligent and well intentioned people get pulled into systems that, in hindsight, reveal deeper harm? Confronting the Line isn't about tearing people down, it's about understanding how charismatic power can organize itself so that we can build cultures of growth that are transparent, accountable, and worthy of trust. Because the real question isn't just who did what. It's about how do these dynamics work and how do we recognize them earlier? Thanks for joining us. Stay tuned for my conversation with one of our favorite guests, Dr. Ed Gurowitz.
This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered legal, medical, or mental health advice. We speak from our personal experiences and opinions. The views expressed are solely those of the individual speaker and are not intended to malign any group, club, organization, or business.
All right, everybody, welcome back to Confronting the Line. I'm here today joined by one of my favorite people and one of our resident experts, Dr. Ed Gurowitz. And I just want to reintroduce Ed a little bit for those of you that haven't seen our earlier episodes, which I encourage you to go watch because they're really great, especially those of you that are super interested in the history around Landmark, the 6-day, the S training, because Ed has been really generous. He was one of those people that was right there on the ground, a part of the whole heyday. And he's done some amazing work with us sharing those experiences. But why I invited Ed today, well, number of reasons. But what I want you to know about Ed is he holds a PhD in psychology and for the past 40 plus years has studied and practiced the art of transformation and individual coaching and organizational change. He's consulted top executives and some of the largest corporations in the world, focusing on strategy, leadership, development, and employee engagement. He's the author of 2 books, his very first book back in the day, The Molecular Basis of Memory, and Inclusion, the Role of Leadership in 2019. And then recently, for those of you who've been hanging around with us, you know about his most recent book, the one that I was just going to hold it up, A Transformation from Potential to Practice. And this is really where I met Ed when his son actually read my book, gave it to Ed. Ed called me. We got to talking about our very similar backgrounds, particularly around working with Werner, and as well as our sort of, I don't know, scruntlement of seeing that the world of transformation has really been used in some pretty harmful and yucky ways. And so we've been studying that together, reading a lot. I think, Ed, you've officially read more cult books than me now. But also, you asked for me to take an early read of your book, Transformation from Potential to Practice. And we'll be recording actually a separate episode about some of what came up on that. But it's a really fantastic book, folks. If you're interested in transformational methodologies and you don't want to pay a gazillion trillion dollars to somebody to give you their brand, which you can only use in certain ways sometimes, get this book. Because Ed really spills the beans on where a lot of those ideas are sourced from, where they come from. They don't, hint, 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 they don't belong to Landmark or Scientology or this or that. Those copywritten things do belong to those organizations, but the ideas themselves do not. So anyway, just a big shout out and plug there, Ed, for your book, because I love
Thanks,
it.
I appreciate it.
We'll talk more about some of the things Ed and I have gotten up to along the way, including our new practitioner studio we just opened for people who really want to understand how to use these ideas safely, ethically, and effectively. Turns out safety, ethics, and effectiveness actually go together. But today I asked Ed to come on and talk to me about something I've been reading, like so many of you, been reading a lot of stuff about these Epstein files and different things coming out and whatnot. And I was reading a post the other day about Noam Chomsky's wife put out a statement about the references to him and a relationship and correlation to Epstein. And it really occurred to me that this whole thing that we're seeing unfold in front of us is a really great opportunity to see a pattern that I think's been pretty destructive as power sort of associates itself and grows. So we're going to be taking that apart a little bit here. So the first thing I want to open with is predators don't isolate first, they affiliate first. So we're going to be looking at this whole thing from the angle of predatory people, predatory mindsets. Predators tend to pursue credibility through proximity. It forms a kind of shield. So you'll see predatory people will often seek out and align themselves and associate themselves with credible people. By credible, meaning people who have earned a certain level of notoriety. And now we have influencer in the space. But academics are a big one, especially for pseudo gurus, because it gives them a kind of legitimacy. And I saw this with the Warner camp. We saw it with Keith Raniere. We see it with L. Ron Hubbard. Didn't seem to do it quite so much. He was pretty confident in his own credibility.
But his followers have made a point of getting people like Tom Cruise and other celebrities. Scientology has emphasized association with celebrities a lot. Well, Hubbard himself, I don't know. I don't know enough about it to know, but
Right.
he may not have done it. His successors absolutely have.
Yeah, right. Tom Cruise, John Travolta. Predators intentionally embed themselves in high status networks, and humans use social proof, right? If respected people trust him, then he must be safe. If Harvard hosted him, he must be legitimate. If he's in those rooms, he must be vetted. I love Dr. John Hunter talks about reaching out to oh gosh, now I'm going to forget the name of a professor. Anyway, within the last 6 years, Warner did a big talk with a pretty well-known professor, I believe in Cal State system about it was actually about ruthless compassion, something that anyway, I do not agree with. And this very well-known professor basically brought Warner onto his stage. They had a whole conversation. He gave this whole introduction of Warner that had all kinds of basically false information in it. And when Dr. John Hunter, who is an academic, reached out to this academic who's, oh man, his name will come up somewhere randomly, and said, "Hey, did you vet him? Like, do you actually know the whole story around Warner? Do and that some of those things that you said were just blatantly false? Like, did you check that out?" And the guy said, No, no, oops, sorry, didn't think of that." So we out here think that all that's going on in the background, but quite often is not. So first thing I just write on that, it's a perfect setup, Ed, from one of my first questions for you, and this is particularly pulling on your psychology background, but why do institutions misread charisma? Why would that guy bring a Warner on the stage? Why is Cal State University trying to do this, landmark hall, and it's gonna have this whole leadership center that's devoted basically, it's a library. It's like a presidential library to Warner.
Well, there's a couple of things involved. With regard to the professor not having vetted Warner's credentials, in general, in academics, and I spent a good number of years in academics early in my career, in general, vetting is assumed. If you've got a PhD, from Harvard or something, that's enough. If you work for, the Wharton School, you're assumed to be competent. Now, unfortunately, that carries over to people who don't have those kinds of credentials. I can imagine that what this guy got was a press kit from Warner's people and, didn't occur to him to check it. I doubt that he had any malintent. As far as you asked about the Cal State, the organization, I don't know, but almost every time I've seen a academic institution start a new program, name a building, etc., there's been money involved,
Right.
donation involved. So
Definitely.
I would only assume, unless someone there is really a devotee, I can only assume that probably there's an endowment.
Absolutely. Terry Giles, who was the, uh, executive, or I'm not sure exactly what title they use, of the board of trustees for Landmark for many, many, many years, and is who I jokingly relate to him as the transformational mafia boss. He's a fixer, he's a lawyer, and he is a devotee, near as I can tell. I mean, he's definitely a fan. By the way, sorry, segue here. I figured it out as Dr. James Doty, 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 and the talk was about compassion, and Warner went into his thing about ruthless compassion, which is one of the things around him. So, but that's interesting. Yeah, it's kind of like baked in that if you're affiliated or aligned. I mean, Landmark had in their thing about 94%, blah, blah, blah. That's a paper that was done by a professor in 1994 at a Harvard University, and they're actually barred from using that to promote themselves. That's part of the rules that Harvard has in place. But they just pulled out a few little key lines and separated it from the paper and did all kinds of machinations to do that.
And also, the general public has a kind of naive view about academics.
Mm,
For example, I've known Harvard professors who are brilliant, absolutely top of the field, and I've known Harvard professors who were both brilliant and crazy. And that's not to single out Harvard because that's been true anywhere I've gone in academics. So the fact that someone has a PhD, the fact that someone works at Harvard or Yale or Columbia or Oxford or anywhere isn't by itself evidence of their stability, especially when they get outside their area of expertise. There are professors who have endorsed Scientology. There are professors who have endorsed Landmark. There are professors who've endorsed LifeSpring. There are professors who've endorsed various religions.
right.
What makes them more qualified than anybody else?
The whole proximity to academia is the coin of the realm in the self-help, pseudo-guru-y space. There's two coins of the realm: high-level academics, Stanford, Harvard, Yale, those kind of things, and Oprah. Now, Oprah has stopped due to, Dr. Oz, um, James Arthur Ray, and Dr. Phil. Like, those people really got their, uplift from being affiliated and being on the Oprah show. And I don't know Oprah personally, but I do have a good friend that does. And, we've talked a little bit about this. And, she thinks at that time she is supporting something. She's read their book or this or that, and it looks good. It looks like something that's helpful and that will help people. And you know what? That's kind of true. I had a good friend of mine said the other day, she goes, this stuff would be so much easier to debunk if it didn't have a little bit of truth in it. So there is real value in some of these trainings. There are teachers that don't have all those credentials and all those abilities that are extraordinary, that have amazing things to offer. I think the thing we're pointing to here is just you can't take it at face value. If you want to avoid undue influence and manipulation, you want to actually look, and this is the thing we're coming to is we can't, these headlines don't work. A press packet isn't enough. Like, you want to just do a little digging. And the cool news is with the internet, it's not that hard. I can't tell you how many things on Facebook I've debunked with just a simple Google search.
Well, also, Oprah's one thing. I have a certain respect for Oprah because of what you said, because she at least reads the book and
Yeah.
interviews the person. But someone like Tom Cruise, John Travolta promotes, I'll be polite, who promotes Scientology on the basis of having participated in it. Okay, anybody can say, I got a lot out of it. I got a lot out of the S training. But at the same time, so what? That's you. That's not me. And in psychology, it's called a halo effect. John Travolta is famous, therefore, anything he says gains the sheen of his famousness, of his fame. And generally speak, public figures like movie stars, rock stars, have not been responsible for the level of influence people grant them without their ever asking for it. And you've got people like George Clooney who do use it responsibly, but you've got a lot of people who just go around endorsing this and that because they like it, but not looking at whether it might possibly be doing harm.
More directly because they get paid. I mean, they get celebrity endorsements
Oh,
are
this is
most
true.
of their income, right?
Yeah, but people, it's interesting. People take celebrity, I mean, that's the theory behind celebrity endorsements is the halo effect. But people, if LeBron James does an ad for, I forget who he does ads for, Nike or somebody, people take that with a grain of salt. They know that he's getting paid, and yeah, he's endorsing the product, but he's getting paid. If somebody who's not presumably getting paid, like a movie star, comes out about a training or a book or a program, and isn't getting paid, people, well, if he's not even getting paid, he must be know what he's talking about. No, he knows what he's talking about when he talks about his own experience, but not when he talks about the program itself.
Gotcha. And there's a little thing that went by in there that I want to keep pointing to. I said this in my book. I said this when I was a program leader. Stop giving the credit to the program. The program was an opportunity, it was an occasion. You can have transformation getting on a city bus. That's not to downgrade the value of that's provided in some of these courses. It's just to get clear about the actual source of your insights, your breakthroughs, whatever you want to call them. It's you, folks. Ed and I can do the exact same program and get totally different things and have a radically different experience. So we discount
And
ourselves in the equation as well. I mean,
sure,
and we should
but
put that
also,
as a topic, the thing you said about facilitators, practitioners, movie stars, influencers, sort of being unconscious to who they are and their influence really. Because to them, they're just the same jerk that woke up 20 years ago. Do you know, like that's, it's just, we are. So we tend to not think of ourselves in terms of the impact we're having on others. We should put that down as a subject to cover in our practitioner studio for sure
yeah,
with
for sure.
our facilitators, coaches, and trainers.
I don't want to. I mean, I've said the same thing you have. You can transform yourself reading the phone book, but it's highly unlikely. What effective programs do is they take the body of knowledge, which is what I put in my book, which is not, as you said earlier, is not proprietary. It's not private or secret or arcane. It's been around for thousands of years, and they package it in a way that makes it accessible to
Mhm.
people. And that, just like, so you got one extreme, you got academic courses. The other extreme, you've got something that's totally experiential, like meditation. You get in the middle between those two, where you've got a combination of information and experience, and it does, without question, have a uh, facilitative effect on people engaging with knowing themselves. Now, as I also, the reason for the subtitle of my book, if that's a peak experience, it remains the potential. You've now demonstrated the potential for transformation. If you put it into practice, you're now engaged with living a transformed life. In either case, the program, you've heard me say this before, and I think I've said it before in a couple of these broadcasts. People don't buy power drills because they need a power drill. They buy a power drill because they need holes. The program, any program, is at best a tool, a power drill. And when people focus on the program rather than the fact that they engaged with it in a way that would add certain impacts in their life, they're misattributing the source of the impact
Well, and they're actually giving away their autonomy, their power, their agency without
completely.
realizing it.
Completely.
So, just one thing before we kind of move off institutions, I just thought would be kind of interesting. What makes these high status institutions vulnerable besides the profit model? I mean, I I do happen to know that Landmark itself pledged at least $4 million to Landmark Hall. I know, I think they raised somewhere
That's
around 20.
all.
Well, I think then that network last I heard any kind of credible something about it, they've gotten very quiet about the whole thing, but it was somewhere around 24 million. It's completely Terry Giles is an alumni of the Cal State Fullerton School where they're doing that. And look, it's not a bad idea. The whole Being a Leader project was about introducing exactly what you just said. We called it ontological, phenomenological ways of educating, but it's about bringing together the knowledge, the ideas with an experience so that people are left. And the thing in that network is being whatever the thing is, being a leader was what we led, being ethical, that those kind of things that has not that approach, many of us have experiences with it. We like it. We've produced cool things in our lives, but I wanna be straight, folks. It has not been studied. It has not been tested really over time. There was a wonderful woman who tried to do a multi-year study on the being a leader participants, and it just got so undermined as to not be useful, not be academically rigorous, et cetera, et cetera.
Let me go back to your question before we lose it,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
you're you're getting away from it.
I know it's easy.
As near as I can tell, every profession has an Achilles heel, at least one.
Yeah.
For self-improvement programs, it's credibility, and they will affiliate with celebrities, with academics, etc. For academic, it's relevance.
Oh, interesting.
So they will look for an opportunity. I have there's no studies that I know about this, but I'm speaking from my own experience and from what I've seen. Individual academics, for sure, will look for opportunities to show that what they do. The old story, the old metaphor of academics is the ivory tower, way up high above
Yeah.
everybody else, and having nothing to do with real life. As a psychologist, particularly, we had a lot of emphasis on translating what we were doing into real life. I mean, other disciplines like chemistry, like physics, it's easy because, chemistry, they develop a drug, they develop a material, something that they sell it, it gets, used. History. Well, history, personally, I read history a lot because I think it has a lot of relevance. A lot of academics are driven to prove that they're relevant, and associating with something out there that's got quote unquote proven application is a way of doing it. And which just brings me back to Jim Doty. I would be willing to bet that what whether he realizes it or not, what was behind his not vetting the press kit that he got was
Right.
the assumption that if it's been around for however many years it's been, 50 years, and thousands of people all over the world have gone through it, and people say nice things about it loudly, and people tend to say not nice things about it softly because there's
Well, they get threatened or
yeah,
used to. I mean,
there's
I have a
negative
shout out
consequences of that.
actually to Landmark for being near as I can tell, they're open to some criticism and some looking because they haven't sued me yet. So let's keep the streak going, guys. But I think you touched on another thing too. So there's like the assumption, which is very guided by we only hear the good stuff, we don't hear the bad stuff, and we have a lot of mechanics to suppress the bad stuff. NDAs, arbitration. I mean, and that's when it gets to legal. If it gets legal, stuff has gone terribly, terribly wrong. And look, Landmark, Werner, Earhart and Associates, Est organization has been sued dozens and dozens of times,
It has sued dozens and dozens of
and they're
times.
sued. Yeah, I haven't been able to find as many of those. We should get that going
Well,
in our.
because they tend to be, I know personally of half a dozen or more, and they tend to settle them so they never get on the
But
record,
the
on the court
filing
record.
should be there. Do they get actually into
They
court or
never
do
get to filing. It's
they gotcha, they gets it's before that, yeah,
yeah.
right.
And I have evidence. I'm
Yes,
not
so do
being
I.
out of turn here. I know from my own experience because they threatened to sue me and settled, and they
Yeah,
did the same with half a dozen friends of mine, maybe more.
yeah, and I don't think that's unique to that organization. I mean, that's all over that's kind of the name of the game, and,
Well, Scientology takes a much more direct approach. They will attack the person, and there's back in the I guess it was 70s, they broke into government offices and stole files, and that's again on the record. I'm not repeating gossip.
well, let's talk about another piece I think we've rubbed up against, which is access to these networks, right? And we see this kind of started for me because I was watching all these pictures go by of, all these pictures that are coming out around these Epstein files. And they're on these luxurious planes and he's at a party and he's getting his picture taken with this person and that person. And, just what I urge people to do is actually like one, wait or read or look to see, well, what is the relationship there? Because not every relationship necessarily means that everybody that's in the picture is a pedophile or that everybody is skeezy or whatever. Now, they could be, but wait for the evidence, folks. The assumption isn't there. But one of the things that's happening is access is one of the most powerful compliance tools in hierarchical systems. So access and the kind of juicy bennies that you get in these kind of affiliations, writing on private planes, going to private islands, invitation only environments, scarcity psychology, VIP inner circles, these kind of things I actually discourage in our safe practitioner classes. We talk about this. How do we actually make money and have assistance, provide something of real value and not fall into some of these traps and tricks and whatnot? Gurus will frequently do exclusive retreats. Being a leader actually had a little bit of that mood to it. Although I just discovered recently, we charged about, it was between 5,500 and 6,500 for 9 nights and the course, and we always did it at like a Ritz-Carlton or something nice. Now that didn't have to do with the stature of that, it had to do with how those places operated and as a demonstration of one of the key principles we were teaching in the course. I mean, that was the primary reason we went to those kind of, places. Turns out that was really cheap. I got an offer the other day for 4 days, 3 nights for a very similar course, 6,500. I was like, "Wow."
The economics of it are not what's important. I led a program for many years called Executive Excellence Program, and we did it in Ritz-Carltons and Four Seasons. For the reason you said, because the service in those places matched the level of people we were dealing with, either high-level executives from major corporations, but also because it was a selling point.
Right.
You're gonna get access to, and for these executives, maybe less so, but certainly for academics or the just general public, how often are you gonna get to go to a Ritz-Carlton or, in Epstein's case, a
Right.
private island? But here's the thing, you mentioned earlier Chomsky, and I read the same article you did from Chomsky's widow.
He
This is a
hasn't
guy. Sorry?
he hasn't passed yet. He's 97 and has had a severe stroke, but I believe he's still alive, isn't he?
Uh, I haven't checked. I assumed he wasn't. So give the poor guy the benefit of the doubt. By the way, I am not a fan of Chomsky's academically his work, but I think he's a very first of all, he's brilliant, which you could be brilliant without me agreeing with you. Second of all, his body of work speaks for itself. So here's a guy who, by his wife's account, had pretty innocuous contact with Epstein. Why, I don't know, but I have a hunch that the initiation for it came from Epstein. And yet at the same time, so now his name is in the files, the much vaunted million pages of files, his name is in there. But there's a big difference between Prince Andrew, I guess he's not a prince anymore, but Andrew Mountbatten, in terms
Exactly.
of what's in the files about them. The same's true with a whole lot of people.
Yeah.
Now, so as you said, if people simply use guilt by association, they're doing a real disservice to these people who, for whatever reason, got engaged in some way with this bad guy. And there's no question in my mind, Epstein's a bad guy. Okay. So again, part of it, and I can't remember who said it. No, I could look it up, but somebody well known said, if you get people to think they're thinking, they'll love you. But if
Mm.
you get people to think, they'll hate you.
Oh, I
And
can
and people, myself included, I'm not exempt, you're not exempt, we
mm,
tend to be lazy. We tend to operate a lot based on assumption or givens or appearances rather than doing the research.
right.
I just wrote an article a couple of days ago about questions. Unanswerable questions are the most powerful tool. The context for that article was coaching, but it's true not only in coaching; it's true for anybody. Rather than looking for answers, and a lot of these Epstein, Warner, Ron Hubbard, I could name dozens of people thrive on offering easy answers.
Right, and one of my favorite books that I've read in the last 20 years was What Makes Your Brain Happy and Why to Do the Opposite. And it's just it's a journalist account, brings together a lot of different neuroscience studies. It's probably 15, 20 years old now, but it's still very relevant in what it offers, which is, your brain is the busiest organ in your body and it's using the most energy and it loves shortcuts to conserve energy. Once I know that thing over there isn't going to get me, I don't have to spend any energy dealing with it anymore. So I think this whole like association thing kind of feeds on that a bit. It's not all bad, it's not all good. Part of academic rigor is citing your sources and saying where, if Ed does an amazing piece of work and I'm gonna use it or reference it, what is ethical, what has integrity, as we used to say in the landmark world, is for me to actually say, "Oh my gosh, I read this incredible thing from Ed the other day." We need to be able to do that and feel comfortable with it. And I did actually do a little bit of looking. There's no evidence in the files that have been read so far that show any bad behavior, as it were, by Noam Chomsky. Unlike some others where you can actually read the email exchanges between them and you can see like, "Ooh, that's skeezy."
Mhm.
Which still doesn't mean that that person is doing illicit or illegal things. They're skeezy.
And while I
Well, the
recognize it's a kind of shortcut you talked about, at some point you have to invoke the duck rule.
What's the duck rule?
If it walks like a duck, quacks like a duck, and has feathers like a duck, chances are it's a duck. If there's enough skeezy references in there, one is justified in drawing a conclusion. And just to remind us, 80% of what's in that report has been redacted by the government.
Right, right.
80%.
Yeah. Well, that's a whole other thing, how these, how these networks protect themselves and then protect each other. I mean, it's something that all of this that's happening is giving us an opportunity to learn and bust open, and to me, the value of that is us, the kinda everyday people, learning how to actually evaluate information, how to actually bring, uh, critical thinking, what to pay attention to. If you read my book, you see this slow rolling naivete that, look, lots of cool stuff happened for me. I'm not denying that in any way, shape, or form. I did get to stay in big suites at Ritz-Carltons. I did get to fly first class. It was really neat, and, all of that stuff happened, for sure, and we also did the
But
course
but
not
one of the points you make in your book, and this is critically important, Ann, is that
Mhm.
while you were doing that, other people were being mistreated.
That's right. Yes, that's what I
And
was that had me then
the
reevaluate.
strength of your book is you didn't turn a blind eye to that. Having lived through a very earlier era of the very same thing, I can tell you that we rationalized it, we turned a blind eye to it, and we said fairly often, "Man, I'm glad that's not me." And it was our turn when it was our turn in the barrel, we found a way to rationalize.
Yes,
And part of that is because it gets back to cognitive dissonance. Once a human being has made a choice to belong, let's say, to an organization, to
right.
be someone's friend, to be fully tuned into the what I'm going to call the dark side of the line that we're confronting here. To be fully tuned into that creates enormous dissonance, enormous cognitive dissonance,
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
it is at some point you've got to resolve it, or it will drive you crazy.
Right. Well, and I would say to I mean, for me, one of the harder things I mean, it was easy when some people came to me and said, "Hey, I'm being physically hurt." It took me a while. I was actually quite upset when I went back and looked at my records and saw the first person came to me in February of 2018, which meant I did 2 more engagements. I did the 2018 course and the 2019 course before we were out. Now, part of that is I was deeply financially entangled. I was very much like, even if they don't have integrity, I'm gonna have integrity. Also, the accusations weren't they were sort of alluded to and hinted at and whatnot. It wasn't clean. It wasn't until 2020, I believe, that a group came to me and said and then walked me through in explicit detail what was actually happening. So there's a lot of things happening here. There's a
But
lot that
you
gets
just said something important that I don't want to miss. You were financially entangled. That's not an accident. Almost all organizations that we would call cults or high control, what's the technical term? High control organizations,
high control groups is the
high control groups,
a little bit wider.
find a way to get people economically dependent.
Mm,
And that keeps them from looking too closely, just like it kept you from looking too closely. There's an old sexist trope about to keep your wife barefoot and pregnant. Well,
mhm.
this is similar. This is the real deal. when I worked, I was a center manager for, it wasn't Landmark yet, but for the organization. As well known, that organization runs, or did at least before they went mostly on virtual, and on volunteer effort, volunteer work. I mean, volunteers doing stuff that in a different context would have paid a lot of money, or at least decent money. They were doing it for free. Or in the case of those of us who were on staff, doing it for way less. I mean, one of Werner's favorite things to talk about was that all these people, meaning the trainers, could be making way more money, you know, as doctors and psychologists and et cetera. That wasn't true for all of us, but it was true for a lot of us. But my point is this: when I was a center manager, there was a rule which was honored much more in the breach than in the observance, that said that anyone whose quote unquote life is not working, that is, their relationships, their finances, their employment status, isn't what it should be, wasn't allowed to assist, to volunteer. So I
Right.
fired all the assistants in that center, and the full weight of the management of the organization landed on my head for
You
doing
don't
that, because
feel
they
a lot.
couldn't function without those people.
Right.
For me, it was a way of making a point about the integrity, lack of integrity, and having people around whose whole lives revolved around volunteering. Um,
To the you're pointing, but I wanna just pause you right there because this is confronting the line. You're right on the line. So, in the United States, it's actually legal for people to volunteer for a for-profit company. I wrote an article, researched this a bunch. So, in and of itself, volunteerism isn't necessarily an exploitive or bad thing. It's the thing with these organizations is they take something and they dial it up to an 11 or a 10, and that's the problem. So, when you have people volunteering to the point at which their life is suffering, their relationships and their life is suffering, particularly in an organization that is about effective life and relationships, right? It's just so hypocritical. It's bananas. And the thing about these groups, I mean, and Landmark's a great example of it. The thing about these groups and these teachings, and look, guys, this is coming. This is starting to come down the pike with AI. There's, a lot of concern about the ways in which AI is going to have availability to psychologically manipulate us. Our best defense is understanding how we are psychologically motivated and manipulated. That's your best defense, not pretending that it can't happen to you. That to me is a big thing when we were talking about how these high level institutions is these guys think, well, I'm so smart. I have a PhD in engineering. Nobody could ever manipulate me. No, anybody who says to me, nobody can manipulate me, that I'm like, oh, you're next in line. Like
well,
that's
what's
that.
funny about that is it means that in the case of certain ones of these groups, like Landmark, if the program is successful, you will leave the group.
Yes, yeah. My mentor at Landmark, actually, he said in one of our trainings one time, he's like, why do you guys keep keeping people around? You're not supposed to do that. That's not how it was built. They should come do a program and go out in the world and make a difference and succeed, all of that." But as a staff member, you were under so much pressure to produce results. Anybody who would help you was like a godsend.
That's
Do
right.
anything for them.
Well, but also for participants who were not on staff, there was a subtle, maybe not so subtle, there was a manipulation. The thing that I consider a breakthrough in my book is the idea that transformation is not an event, it's a practice. That got distorted in that program and other programs like Scientology, to where the practice you were inculcated with was bringing people into the group.
Buying the
Well,
next
and
program.
buying the next program. So that
Yeah. Passivity, by the
instead
way.
of creating, when I work in organizations, we create what are called cultural practices, which would then get disseminated throughout the organization and become part of the values of the organization. And they're never about making money. They're never about, I mean, they're about improving product in the name of quality and integrity, but their values, cultural practices like accountability, like integrity, like quality, like, a lot of great things. But, P.T. Barnum, which nobody remembers anymore, but the guy who
I
started
used
Ringling Brothers, Barnum and
to.
Bailey Circus, P.T. Barnum famously said, "There's a sucker born every minute." What makes us suckers is wanting out from under the personal responsibility for our own lives. We
Yeah.
want somebody to tell us what to do. And I don't care if it's Jesus or Buddha or Werner Erhard or L. Ron Hubbard, it doesn't matter. If someone will just tell us how to be a good person, how to live a good life, we'll
Well,
follow.
and understand our confusing feelings and deal with the yeah, all of this. That's why
All of that.
I haven't walked away from growth and development, actually. I'm much more committed that we evolve, that we take everything we've learned and we evolve, we make it better. That's what you and I are trying to do with the practitioner studio, everything we're doing.
You also that you're I think what you're a key contribution that I've gotten from you is I consider myself a pretty ethical person. I've had lapses in my life, but generally I consider myself a pretty ethical person, but I had never really stopped to examine the ethics, for example, of promising an outcome.
Mm,
I'm still struggling with that a little bit because people, from a business point of view, what people are looking for with consultants and coaches is outcomes.
mhm.
It's the promising it part. I can't promise it because ultimately it depends on them.
And you can't use that as an out, by the way. I sent you that, a person that I know invited me to come to their leadership training, and their entire page says over and over and over, this is for committed people, for committed people. If committed people do this, what's subtly being communicated there is as the leader, I don't have any responsibility for what you
Right.
get or
If you don't get the outcome, you're
you
not
don't get the
committed.
outcome, it's on you. So it's a double
And
bind.
that's you and I are very familiar with that one from our history. But see, there's a very important, and I have to get an image made of this. It's a C.S. Lewis who wrote the Narnia books and all that.
Mhm.
Wrote a very slim little book called Mere Christianity, and in that book, which is terrific, he has one metaphor, which is there's a guy sitting in a prison cell, and the prison cell has a wall with a window way high up, and once a day the sun hits that window and there's a little brightly lit square on the floor.
Mhm.
And so the prisoner worships the window rather
Mm,
than the light, rather than going to the light, turns around and worships the source, what he considers the source of the light.
mm.
Lenny Bruce said it better. He said, if Jesus had gotten the electric chair, we'd all be wearing electric chairs around our neck. So the key thing, I think, the line that you have drawn so well in these series, the line is personal responsibility. The line is, if it's going to be, it's up to me, and I can use any tool I got as long as I remember that the outcome I'm looking for is not owning a power drill, it's having holds. And I'm the one who's going to have to use the power drill to get those holds, not the power drill. It's not responsible for the hold.
That's an important piece, and maybe we'll go into this deeper, in a different conversation, but I do wanna put a bookmarker there because one of the most weaponized distinctions, ideas, is the idea of personal responsibility. So, I have a little bit of pushback on that, but I wanna
I'm talking about
underline.
in one specific context.
I understand, let me finish. So, what I want the piece that you said that was really important there is, I wanna drill holes. You have to be in the framing of, "What am I there for?" And if I'm gonna use the tool, but then I gotta bring a lot more. I gotta bring my critical thinking. I've gotta bring my curiosity. I have to bring skepticism. One of the lines here in my notes says, "How does exclusivity reduce critical thinking?" That's one of the things about these high control groups. And you get in these groups, you get, or with a teacher, or when you turn your autonomy over, not only do you reduce critical thinking, you reduce curiosity, which I actually think is the most valuable thing that we can bring. You reduce skepticism, you reduce all of that. And then we internalize it like, oh, well, I just wasn't responsible enough. I didn't use the tool well enough. No, the tool wasn't designed to make holes. Somebody told you it was. They may have had a good sales pitch. They may have even actually given a fantastic promise. They are liars. People lie. So you need to bring,
Or to continue the metaphor, they sold you a power drill and told you it was really good for polishing stuff.
yeah.
So you went out and tried to polish stuff with the power drill, and you got holes instead. And they say, "Well, what the hell do you expect? It's a drill."
Right. And that's what I'm pushing back on and questioning. So, the final thing I want to look at in this segment of this conversation is what we call network shielding. So, high status predators often survive because no one wants to be the first to question. Everyone assumes we've touched a number of these points. Everyone assumes somebody else vetted them, or I trust the person that vetted them. This is why referrals work so well. I trust Ed. So if Ed says it's a good thing, then I'm going to do it. Okay. Ed says it's a good thing. It's something for me to look at, but then I need to evaluate for myself, right? Is that actually good for me? So fear of reputational backlash, that's a huge one. I mean, I can't even tell you, I can still almost feel it in my body the day that I hit return on my social media notice that I had written a book that had in its title, The Cult World in Relationship to Landmark. I knew I was blowing up a certain segment of my life. So anyway, but that's just a big one. And then as you keep pointing out, cognitive dissonance.
Comes back to cognitive dissonance, really. But that's oversimplifies it. I think the point that the distinctions you've made, especially this last one, the reputation one, is critically important. I think Brene Brown would say it all comes back to shame. We
Mm,
are so wired to believe that there is some deep, dark thing that must be kept secret about us, or we'll be judged unworthy of human connection. That's her definition of shame. And ultimately, everything we've talked about, all the manipulation, all the peer pressure, everything else, ultimately thrives on that. That's what feeds it. Because if I'm not good enough, the shame is always some version of I'm not good enough,
yeah, something's wrong
smart
with me.
enough, pretty enough, whatever. If this will shield that, will help me shield that, will help me make sure nobody ever finds out, then I'll give myself over to it. And I
Mm.
think that's really the critical piece is
Well,
shame.
that you're speaking to what Chris, Shelton is a model, REM model. He talks about our emotional needs, like, so keeping ourselves safe, keeping ourselves as part of a group is a big part to that. So that's why speaking against the group is very dangerous. Let's wrap on that is the difference between charisma and character. Because this is what I'm committed to. This is why I want to confront the line so we can start to educate ourselves and stop enabling these kind of predatory people into our leadership positions. By enabling them, I mean helping them to happen. It's only enablement if you stay supporting it after you knew. When you didn't know, you didn't know. But when you know something is harmful or wrong, and then you continue either by silence or cover or whatnot, now you are complicit. Now you are enabling something.
The only thing it takes for evil to triumph is for good people to remain silent.
I'm going to pause us right there. And because Ed and I are going to continue this conversation, folks, on excited to announce I have launched a Patreon channel. It's called Beyond the Line. And so we're going to keep the conversation and go a little bit deeper, which is what Beyond the Line is going to be about, is getting into the more psychological nuances of these kinds of things. How do we get entrapped and why do we stay? So, if this conversation makes you curious about the internal psychology behind these dynamics and how even transformational spaces can drift in these traps, we're going to continue the conversation on Beyond the Line. There's a link in the show notes, and we'll see you there. Thanks, Ed.
Thank you.